It was an active trade deadline in the NFL, with one notable exception. My name is Joe Dolan, and this is the Fantasy Points Daily Lineup for Wednesday, November 2nd, 2022.
It's time for the FantasyPoints.com Daily Lineup. Staying on top of the latest news and updates around the NFL. Rise and shine, folks. We're taking the field. Here's your host, FantasyPoints.com's Joe Dolan.
Starting at quarterback today, we have someone who didn't get any added help on Tuesday. Despite constant speculation that the Packers would be adding Brandon Cooks or Elijah Moore or Chase Claypool or Sterling Sharp or whoever, Green Bay did nothing at the trade deadline. So Aaron Rodgers, you got to do it with the group you have. Now, the Packers might be a little better than you think, per Football Outsiders DVOA. Their offense is 8th in the NFL, but I wonder just how much of that is because so many teams in the NFL are downright bad this year. Now, it was great to see Romeo Doubs rebound from his awful Week 7 to score a really impressive touchdown in Week 8 because Green Bay needs more of that going forward. Hey, Odell Beckham is still out there, guys. Now, in our first running back spot today, Buffalo finally landed its man. The Bills have been looking for the perfect passing down back since the spring. They tried to sign Chase Edmonds. They tried to sign J.D. McKissick. They drafted James Cook. They tried to trade for Christian McCaffrey multiple times. And now at the trade deadline, they probably got the best of all those options, sans McCaffrey, in picking up Hines for running back Zach Moss and a 2023 sixth-round pick. Hines can also help them in the return game. Now, it's easy to see why Buffalo wanted Hines. Since he entered the league in 2018, his 235 receptions rank 6th among running backs, behind elite fantasy options Alvin Kamara, McCaffrey, Austin Eckler, Leonard Fournette, and Ezekiel Elliott. And by pass rate over expectation, the Bills are tied with the Chiefs for the highest rate in the league this year. The fact that the Bills have so aggressively pursued someone in this role suggests that they want someone who is a better receiver than Devin Singletary. Singletary is fantasy's overall RB27 at 11.2 fantasy points per game, and he's done an admirable job as a receiver, but his 30 targets over the Bills' first 7 games are likely to fall over the next 10. This is also a potential blow to slot man Isaiah McKenzie, who has had an inconsistent season for the Bills. Meanwhile, Hines is a primo flex option in a pristine situation. Literally, if you were carrying him as a handcuff to Jonathan Taylor, you could still go pick up Deion Jackson as the handcuff, and now you have a potential flex or maybe even RB2. This is good news for Nyheim Hines. Now, Hines is under contract through 2024, but Buffalo can get out of the deal at no penalty after this season. So while this is a blow to the dynasty value of James Cook, who had just started to get some meaningful snaps, I'm not writing him off just yet. In fact, I'd consider making some buy low offers for Cook, as Singletary is also scheduled to hit free agency after this season. Now, in our second running back spot is someone who desperately needs the buy. The Steelers' Naji Harris just continues to look tentative, slow, and perhaps not fully healthy from his offseason foot injury. But the biggest concern to me is that he doesn't seem to realize he weighs 230 pounds. Against the Eagles in Week 8, he posted 8 carries for 32 yards on the ground and 6 catches for 26 yards on all 6 of his targets, while playing 71% of the offensive snaps. But 18 of those rushing yards came on a single run, with the game basically out of hand in the second half. It was one of the rare occasions that Naji actually planted his foot and drove forward. At this point, it's hard to know if Harris's flaws are coachable. He seems to have been spooked into tentativeness by a poor offensive line, while UDFA backup Jaylen Warren just puts his head down and goes. Warren had 6 carries for 50 yards and 3 catches for 25 yards on just a 37% snap share. The Steelers are going on bye, and maybe Naji will get healthier. But to this set of eyes, it's a problem that goes just far beyond health. It's a mentality issue, and Naji, for fantasy right now, is just a low-end RB2. It's also possible that the Steelers used the bye to get Warren more involved, which would render Naji near unplayable. In our first wide receiver spot, we now have a former teammate of Naji Harris. Now, see, the Bears have needed wide receiver help ever since the duo of Alshon Jeffrey and Brandon Marshall were each putting up massive seasons with Jay Cutler. you didn't know how good you had it then, Bears. And they aggressively pursued that at the trade deadline, acquiring Chase Claypool from the Steelers for a 2023 second-round pick. It is their own second-round pick, by the way, not the one that they acquired from Baltimore for Roquan Smith. So this is a pretty hefty investment. Now, why would the Bears do this? Well, first of all, there are reports that Green Bay was hot for Claypool too. And Chicago, on account of being potentially worse than the Packers, was able to beat Green Bay's offer of a second-round pick. Now, from a fantasy perspective, I'm really intrigued, honestly, to see how this affects Darnell Mooney. And here's why. At a 58.2% slot route share, Mooney was the Bears' primary slot receiver this season. But he has been far more effective outside than inside, averaging 2.84 yards per route run outside, which is 10th most among wide receivers, and just 1.12 yards per route run inside, which is 85th. That's per fantasy points data, by the way. Meanwhile, Claypool has run the second most routes from the slot in the entire NFL behind only Tyler Boyd. On a per route basis, Claypool is actually less productive in the slot than Darnell Mooney, though he's also worse outside than he is in the slot. The biggest fantasy impact from this trade could well be Claypool pushing Mooney to the perimeter more, where he's been more effective. And while Justin Fields has been much better of late, the Bears are still the NFL's most run-heavy team this year. There isn't likely to be more than one consistently fantasy-relevant receiver here. Look, it's clear multiple teams around the NFL feel like Claypool's underwhelming 2021 and 2022 seasons, in which he's clearly landed in Mike Tomlin's doghouse, don't outweigh his impressive 2020 rookie campaign in which he scored 11 touchdowns. But from my perspective, this is an overpay, and the Steelers generally know when to move on from a wide receiver. In our second wide receiver spot, we have someone who was traded but won't play this year. The Jaguars acquired Calvin Ridley from the Falcons. Now, this might have been the most shocking trade of the day, since Ridley has been out of sight, out of mind since his indefinite suspension for gambling. As a matter of fact, you might remember that there were reports that the Eagles had swung a deal for Calvin Ridley, but Atlanta, in like one of the most good sportsmanship moves of all time, said, you might not want to do that. It came out really soon that he was going to be suspended for gambling, and now he's on a new team anyway. This trade has a ton of conditions, so I'll let Adam Schefter explain them. Per Schefter, the Falcons are getting a 2023 fifth-round pick for Ridley, but they also get a 2024 fourth-rounder if Ridley is on the Jags roster when the 2024 league year kicks off. It becomes a third if Ridley reaches certain incentives, and it becomes a second if the Jaguars extend Ridley's contract. Remember, Ridley's suspension was for at least a season, so Commissioner Roger Goodell has to reinstate him. But this is a phenomenal risk for the Jags to take, as it will give them a legitimate perimeter winner to pair with slot man Christian Kirk, again, in theory, in 2023. There's a lot of valid concern about Trevor Lawrence right now, though, but Ridley's dynasty value rises with him, as opposed to the Marcus Mariota, Desmond Ridder / unknown 2023 rookie quarterback in Atlanta. Now, if the Falcons ever do decide to try the forward pass again, this boosts the dynasty value of Kyle Pitts and Drake London. In our flex spot, we have a shocking intra-divisional trade. Minnesota dealt a 2023 second-round pick and a 2024 third-round pick to Detroit for tight end TJ Hawkinson, a 2023 fourth-round pick, and a conditional 2024 fourth-round pick. Now, I think this is the closest deal we had on deadline day to a blockbuster, and it's easy to wonder if Minnesota even makes this trade if Irv Smith didn't suffer a serious high ankle sprain in Week 8. He could miss the rest of the season. Minnesota has essentially been using Smith and Johnny Munt in a rotational type of role. Smith is their receiving tight end and their red zone option, and Munt is more of their run blocker. Really, the simplest take here for the rest of the 2022 season is that Hawkinson will be a straight-up replacement for Smith as the Vikings' receiving tight end. That's potentially problematic for Hawkinson, the tight end 4 right now at 12.12 fantasy points per game. That's because Irv's season-high snap share is 64%, while Hawkinson's season-low snap share is 76%. He was an every-down player for the Lions, and the Vikings do not use their tight ends that way. But it's also more possible that Hawkinson is more consistently targeted on the routes he does run for Detroit, and for Minnesota, rather. And maybe it develops into a full-time role. Now, Irv Smith was targeted on 21.2% of his routes run for Minnesota, similar to Hawkinson's 20.9% for Detroit. And Hawk is simply a more gifted receiving talent. perhaps Kirk Cousins gravitates more to Hawkinson than he did to Irv Smith. And it's also a potential positive that the Vikings' top receiver isn't an inside player like Amon-Ra St. Brown in Detroit. Mostly, I consider this a lateral move from a fantasy perspective. It might boost Kirk Cousins a little bit, and Hawkinson could have a little more TD equity in a better and more consistent offense. But the fact that he has to learn a new offense and the potentially shrinking snap share are concerns. Now, from a long-term perspective, the fact that Minnesota gave up 2 day 2 draft picks suggests they love this player. And Hawkinson could be Minnesota's number 2 target behind Justin Jefferson as early as next season, with Adam Thielen on the wrong side of 30. Now, for Detroit, this obviously opens up a potential bigger target share for St. Brown, who is already one of the game's preeminent ball hogs. But a name I'm very intrigued by is 5th-round rookie tight end James Mitchell, who made his first NFL catch, a 14-yarder, in Week 8. Those of you in Dynasty, especially tight end premium Dynasty, go get James Mitchell. I'm Joe Dolan, and this has been a special trade deadline edition of the Fantasy Points Daily Lineup. I hope you all enjoyed breaking down what was the most active trade deadline in NFL history. Now, I have a full article breaking down all the moves, all that involves skill position players. There's more than I talked to about on here up at the website. It's available for free. And I also have a new article called The Mismatch Report, which is powered by Fantasy Points data, breaking down the biggest mismatches in the run and pass game in Week 9 as well. That'll be a new Tuesday feature going forward. So I hope everybody enjoyed this edition of the Daily Lineup. Go to fantasypoints.com, use code lineup2022 for an extra lineup22, not lineup 2022, lineup22 for an extra 10% off an already discounted website. Thank you, everybody, and I will talk to you tomorrow.